Chapter 10. The butter hits the fan. Have you heard of WYSIWYG, Ted? Said Mr. Butter. One of those TV people. Is he on Wurzel Gummidge? I said. Ha ha ha. Ted, the question is, how much RAM is there on the hard disk, hard casing kind of thing? Question really of whether it's accessible or not. Could be a difficulty, you see. Always been a difficulty in this area, you understand. Technology, what they call high tech, involving infotech stuff. First time I came across it, reading a magazine in the library, I thought, Eagle needs this. Eagle needs this. Getting the taxi use database on it. Might lead looking at that one. What with COBOL Pascal and functions, laser printer, real time. Mr. Butter words mean nothing to me. The fact is, the other night when Mr. Butter was hanging around again like bloody Michael Heseltine, waiting for his opportunity, tormenting me and harassing the regulars with requests for bloody A6s, O45s, cups of coffee, lists of names, room vacancy status, drinks cabinet contents check, flight session diary agenda, etc., etc., etc. He seemed to take a turn for the worst. I know he's been putting in about 16 hours a day to prove how hard working he is. But he came up to me and said, "Listen, Ted, I think the and then he just walked away. Later on that night, I saw him wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that he was dipping into a glass of whiskey or some other amber-coloured liquid. But surely, God, not urine. Stress. Oh, the fucking stress. Me working so hard," I could hear him saying. "Oh, God, the stress. And not a minute's break from it." He kept ranting. "Why don't you take a break away from the hotel?" I said, in a semi-mischievous way. "Away from the hotel? Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Oh, stress me to death, you fat bastard." Time had obviously taken its dreadful toll on the finest managers of hotels in the north of England. The poor man had flipped, and that's why Mr. Just Call Me Al Butterthwaite came to be saying these odd things to me when I got in for work the following night. And I wasn't the first staff member to notice. I don't always meet the day staff in my job, but I did bump into Kelly from reception when I arrived. She looked as if she had some serious ailment, the way she was standing, but I didn't mention that to her. "Don't look at me like that, Ted. I'm only waiting for my boyfriend to come, in the manner of speaking," she said. Then she grabbed me by the arm and took me over into the corner and said, in an almost quiet, reverent whisper, "Have you seen Mr. Butterthwaite yet?" At the time I hadn't. "Well, you are in for one bugger of a surprise. You'll burst your friggin' bladder bypass when you hear what kind of shite he's coming up with. I mean, he's lost his bloody marbles. Must be the pressure of the job. But honestly, been talking about bloody everything from Kings of England to the best kind of motor oil to use in a two-stroke engine, whatever the fuck that is. And all this computer stuff. I don't know what he's on about. Sounds like he's had a friggin' stroke to me. What's a megabyte when it's at home anyway?" "I'm not sure what you mean, Kelly," I said, being careful like. "Surely not the manager of the hotel and regional coordinator, or whatever the fuck he is, no?" "Hey, don't be bloody funny with me, Ted. Hey, listen. The fella's dropped a bollock in his brain, as me dad used to say about Enoch Powell. But I don't, I mean, is something wrong?" "Listen, early on today he comes to me and he says, no, listen, earlier on today he sees me coming back from the toilet like, and I'm expecting some kind of going over. Anyway, he says, and honest to God, you gotta believe me, he says, first of all, don't use too much toilet paper in the females, okay? I don't believe people can shit that much. Honest to God, that's what he said. And so I said, pardon. And he said, from now on, there'll be a continuous audit of toilet requirements, female variety. And by the way, if the doctor tells you to open your bowels, just give him a piece of your mind. Of course, I said, pardon, Mr. Butterthwaite. And he says, that's not all. I need some strong measures around here for computerized information system waste efficiency drive accountability management initiative. That's what he said. I'm about done with this, I can tell you. What was he going on about? I said, again, pardon, Mr. Butterthwaite, and he just walked off, muttering something about taxi database, whatever that is. I told her that it sounded as if Mr. Butter was maybe a bit distressed. I've read about these demented Roman characters, like Nero, for example. He used to wander around the streets of Rome at night stabbing people and throwing them into the sewer as a kind of hobby. But surely Mr. Butter's complaint is medical rather than what's called moral. Therefore, when I saw Mr. Butter later, his strange utterances, though meaningless, did not entirely surprise me. Anyway, I had a job to do, and I simply got on with it, booking people in, not many as usual for this time of year, carrying luggage upstairs, giving advice about the most interesting night spots in Liverpool, apart from my mother's face. I had to keep going on the A6s and A45s, although I was convinced their days were numbered. What I did was just fill out every other one. But then it all starts to get worse. First of all, I saw Kelly again the following day. "Oh, watch out, Buzz about," she said. He'd been trying to get her to count the number of keystrokes she'd made on the computer during the day. Something about cutting down on the amount of work. Excess human energy. The key resource being people. That's what the stupid bastard said. I'll tell you another thing. These bloody taxi use database forms are driving me head screwy. My head spins, my heart palpitates, my breathing gets heavy. I'm brain raped. All for the sake of this friggin' ridiculous piece of shite he's got us doing now. I tell you, watch out, Butter's about. I know what this taxi use database is all about. All the time, taxis deliver people to the Eagle. But about 4 or 5 weeks ago, when I was on duty one Friday night, I was reading some Tacitus about that Agricola bloke, when this fat taxi driver, I knew him from the woodbine sticking out of his mouth, comes in. Bursts in, actually, because the first thing he did was rush to the toilet. And then he said, "Listen, do you do short ones?" "What do you mean?" I said. "Short numbers on the rooms, pal. Couple of hours ago. If you do, I'll put you on the driver's list, like." Well, I didn't mind. Made no difference to me, so I said, "All right." "Great," he said. "I've got a couple in the back here need somewhere for, well, they call it romantic purposes, but I'd call it a roll in the A. You got me meaning? Anyway, here's a £5 in it. 3 for me, 2 for you. Usual rates, all right?" I must have nodded, because the next thing, there's this fat taxi driver, woodbine in his mouth, with an even fatter woman, who also had some kind of fag in her mouth. She was not far removed from one of those monsters in black and white films, with growths all over their bodies, and hair sticking out of their nostrils, and all kinds of things like that. I didn't find her particularly attractive, but the man with her did. He reminded me of a school teacher. Dark suit, little pair of glasses, teacher's shoes. All the time he kept kissing the B-movie monster. He'd do anything for me, he would. He's like that, ain't you, Chuck? All he wants is a bit of time with Gina. I just let him get on with it. But they had to fill out the bloody forms. Once the job was done, I was £2 better off. taxi driver 3, and Gina's intended had a smile across his face that would have stopped Julius Caesar against the nervy. The next night, there's the fat bastard taxi driver with the Woodbine and the B-movie monster, and some man looking like a builder. His boots were dirty and he had no jacket, only a bloody t-shirt. The next night, a different taxi driver and a different B-movie monster, but there's the school teacher bloke from before. Then the next night, there's a fairly normal looking woman, but the bloke was the B-movie monster. On a couple of nights, the taxi drivers came 2 or 3 times, so I had to give the 045s and A6s a miss, because they would all be using the same room at different times. By this time, I'm about 30 quid better off as a result of what the Woodbine bloke called commission. And that's where the taxi use database comes from. When Kelly saw me a few days later, she said, "Watch out." The reason being that Butter came up with this idea for a visual recognition input for the bloody taxi use database. God almighty. What we have to do is make a kind of drawing of the people who come to the hotel by taxi. Butter provided us with some kit. Pick a V, as it's called. A kind of set of noses and ears and eyes and hair and head shapes to make pictures so that they look like the ones in the Liverpool Echo. The ones that are supposed to be an artist's impression of an attempted rapist, but always end up looking like some bloody ape. So there it was. I would get some B-movie creature and her intended lover in, and as soon as the 045 and A6 were out of the way, I would get the bloody Pick-a-V out and try and make pictures to represent the departing copulators. And then, the other day, Kelly said to me, "The only sensible thing I've heard Butter say in the last 2 weeks is that all these stupid pictures you're doing look like apes." Then she started laughing her head off, showing me this picture of one of the client-stroke-guests. "Look at the gob on that one," said Kelly. "I've never seen anything more bloody ape-like than that." Then I told her that the woman actually looked like an ape. I told her that some people did anyway, like my mother, for example. But the whole bloody thing is ridiculous. I was telling Jeff about the data use. I was telling Jeff about the taxi use database and the visual recognition input and the Pick-a-V set and the way all mine turned out like apes. He leans over to the desk and he says, "Listen to me." I was telling Jeff about the taxi use database and the visual recognition input and the Pick-a-V set and the way all mine turned out like apes. He leans over to the desk and he says to me, "Listen, don't take it to heart if your man's like an ape. I think they're very gentle creatures." "Oh, thanks a heap," I said. "Well, according to Kelly, one of the day girls, he's well gone. I mean, he's off. He's completely off his chariot." "Oh, well, that's good to hear. That is actually warming to the heart." No sooner had he said this, Mr. Butter actually makes an appearance. Mind you, it took me a while to recognise him because he was wearing a white blazer with some kind of design on it. Wang Computers for the new businessman. He had a couple of glossy magazines in his hand, something like Personal Computer World and PC Bargains. "Gentlemen, here, need something," said. "Good opportunity to use the FlexiBase 6 customer profile database. Perhaps even visual recognition input, some DTP without bottom-up programming. Is that going to he said. "You mentioned something about bottom-up, said Jeff. "Ted, if a customer wants, a customer shall have. Rule number 1 of the system. But monitoring is key point question of corporate identity. American model management efficiency, clear-cut directives will be top-down. Question, who needs it? Answer, everybody. So, If you don't get this taxi use database system working, the whole world could fall apart. Apart meaning, and let me quote, compressed video will still need high speeds on buses interlinking the stored data with the high speed processing engines. Currently processing power is in prospect, but the wide variety of special hardware for that is available for classic Intel-based PC processors still shows up the relatively poor pipeline that arises from the bus rates used to link file stores with processing units. Oh, I see, said Jeff. A question of poor pipelines, eh? And you'd know something about that, wouldn't you? Said John Smith, who had just popped in. You're right. You're fucking right. Central processing units. 150 or 166 megahertz. Windows environment. Floppy drive. File conversion software. Bloody hell, Ted, what's happening to me? I need a rest. Mr. Butter kind of fell on the floor. Not a grade A collapse, but something near it. So we helped him into the office, got him a cup of coffee and let him sleep. I knew there was something wrong when he mentioned his floppy drive, said Jeff. A suitable case for treatment. Am I megabyte or am I megabyte? Said John in his Cockney rhyming slam. A few days later, a note appeared on the board near the office. Mr. Alan Butterthwaite is to take extended leave. Those wishing to write to him should send letters, in the first instance, to the governors of the Kendall Institute for the Potentially Insane, marking the letter confidential, only to be opened by supervisor. Mr. Butterthwaite sends his best regards to all his colleagues and hopes to be back in action sometime in the future. The management wish him well. Signed, the Chester office. Next to it was another note. In the interests of financial prudence, computer equipment recently leased will be sent back to InfoCrunch PDC Kendall.